Volcanoes can sleep for hundreds of years, even millennia, before they awaken with explosive force. But what happens when a volcano awakens is not always an eruption. Some volcanoes may just let out some gas before going back to sleep again. And some may have small eruptions that are not very dangerous. However, other volcanoes may erupt so violently that they engulf entire cities and change the climate of the Earth. For example, Mount Vesuvius in Italy destroyed the Roman city of Pompeii in 79 AD. Krakatoa in Indonesia caused a tsunami that killed more than 36,000 people in 1883. And in 1980, Mount St. Helens in the United States had the deadliest eruption in US history. So what's the difference between a quiet awakening and a violent eruption? And how can we tell when a sleeping volcano is about to blow? Well, before we get into that, we need to figure out what's inside an active volcano, because it turns out that not all volcanoes contain the same stuff. Take Stromboli, an active volcano in Italy that has been erupting almost constantly since 1985. Stromboli is a so-called Hawaiian volcano. It contains mostly fluid basaltic lava that flows easily. These types of volcanoes tend to have gentle slopes and don't usually pose much of a threat to life unless, of course, they're near a densely populated area. They also tend to be very predictable. Scientists know when they're going to erupt, because Stromboli often gives hints that an eruption is coming. For example, scientists have noticed that earthquakes around Stromboli increase in frequency before an eruption. There are also small tremors that happen regularly, kind of like hiccups. And all of these signs help scientists estimate when Stromboli will erupt next. Luckily for those living on the island of Stromboli, where only about 400 people live, scientists have been able to warn them each time an eruption was coming. However, many volcanoes don't behave this way. For instance, Mount Helens didn't give any warning signs before its deadly eruption in 1980. And it's not the only one. Most explosive eruptions actually happen at volcanoes that contain a type of magma called andesitic or rhyolitic lava. Andesitic and rhyolitic magmas contain more silica than basaltic magma. Silica makes the magma more viscous, which means it's thicker and stickier. This causes gases dissolved in the magma to become trapped and builds up pressure inside the volcano. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great, and the volcano erupts violently, releasing all the built-up energy. These explosive eruptions are called Plinian eruptions, named after Pliny the Younger, a Roman author who described the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. The danger of a Plinian eruption depends on the volcano's location. For example, the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia was so massive that it caused the year without summer in 1816. The average global temperature dropped by about 1 degree Celsius, and food shortages and disease killed an estimated 100,000 people. On the other hand, the 2010 eruption of the Eyjafjallajökull volcano in Iceland didn't cause any deaths or serious injuries despite being quite large. That's because it happened in a very remote place. Now, while the consequences of volcanic eruptions depend largely on their location, the severity of an eruption also matters. Small eruptions are less severe and can sometimes even be pretty chill. Take, for example, the Lacher See volcano in Germany. In 2020, the European-wide volcanic unrest alert system detected increased seismic activity at the volcano. An increased frequency of earthquakes is a sign that magma is moving towards the surface. Soon after, there were signs of ground deformation. Together, these clues meant that there was a good chance that the volcano would erupt soon. Fortunately, scientists were able to warn people in the surrounding area so that they could evacuate. The volcano then erupted, and luckily no one was hurt. But if the eruption had been larger, the results could have been catastrophic. That's because the Lakiri sediments are full of highly explosive pumice, and if the eruption had been bigger, it could have covered much of Central Europe in ash. On the other hand, the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines caught scientists off guard. In the years prior to the eruption, the volcano hadn't shown much activity except for some steam emissions. Because of this, most Filipinos weren't aware that the volcano was dangerous. As a result, thousands of people died in the eruption's initial blast, and many more perished from the heavy ashfall that followed. After the eruption, there was an incredible amount of lava that flowed down the mountainside, destroying everything in its path. So given that eruptions can vary so much in severity, how do scientists figure out which volcanoes are most likely to blow? Well, one way is to look at a volcano's history. For example, Mount Vesuvius is considered to be one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world because it's located near Naples, a city with over 4 million people. And it's not the only volcano that poses a serious risk to people living nearby. About 3 million people live within 30 miles of Mount St. Helens, including major cities like Seattle and Portland. That's why the US government keeps a close eye on the volcano's activity. But monitoring volcanoes is not easy, because there isn't just one thing you can look at to tell if it's about to erupt. Instead, volcanologists use various methods to gather information about what's happening beneath the surface. For example, they might look at how often earthquakes are happening in the area. Small earthquakes can be caused by the movement of magma, which can indicate that an eruption is coming. They might also look for changes in the shape of the volcano. If the volcano is bulging, it could be a sign that magma is pushing up against the surface. Or if the ground around the volcano is bulging, it could mean that magma is moving laterally, which can also lead to an eruption. Additionally, scientists monitor gas emissions from the volcano. Changes in the amount or type of gas being emitted could indicate that the magma chamber is getting ready to release its contents. And they can even study steam vents in more detail to learn more about what's below the surface. All of these things can give scientists a sense of what's happening beneath the surface and help them to predict whether or not an eruption is imminent. And just to be sure, they also use satellites. Satellites are really helpful because they can take measurements of volcanoes remotely, which is important because it can be dangerous to go anywhere near an active volcano. For example, satellites can measure changes in a volcano's temperature, which can indicate an impending eruption. They can also detect changes in the gases being emitted by a volcano. By measuring these things, satellites can help scientists keep tabs on volcanoes and make sure that they're prepared for anything. So while we still can't say exactly what will happen when a volcano awakens, we are getting better at predicting eruptions. And that's good news because it means that we can warn people living near volcanoes so that they can get out of the danger zone if necessary. Now, we're able to monitor volcanoes in ways that we never have before. Hopefully, this will help us to avoid disasters like the one that befell Pompeii. Speaking of ancient civilizations, do you know what it was like when the Roman Empire fell apart? You can find out in our series, Ancient Worlds. Each episode of this 6-part series explores different civilizations at pivotal moments in their past. For example, in one episode, you can see what life was like during the Bronze Age in ancient China. Or you can find out what it was like when the Maya civilization was at its peak. You can watch Ancient Worlds exclusively on a streaming platform.